Dhaulagiri, number 7 of the 14 8,000'ers that lie on our planet. We always hear stories from Everest and K2, rightfully so, but the summit of any of these 14 mountains are coveted in the mountaineering world. Over the last 60 years, the history of each mountain continues to grow, and of course, that comes with tragedy. Even as most recent as last year, May of 2022 brought the first death on an 8,000'er that season. This is that story. I've covered a few stories on this channel, okay, maybe more than a few, but this week instead of taking a long trip into the past, I wanted to do something different to show the danger of 8,000'ers even today, when our technology and knowledge is 100 times better than the first pioneers of the mountains. Even if you can purchase the best gear, hire the best Sherpas, and plan relentlessly, because of the many lives lost before you, there will always be risks. No matter the planning, there can always be unpredictable acts of nature that change everything in an instant. The 2022 climbing season started off, well, busy. Smaller countries rely on the money from mountaineering to help support their economy, as permits are a big revenue source, thus issuing permits to anyone who has the funds. Whether it's right or wrong, I won't debate here, but the simple fact is that many climbers nowadays can be climbing some of the hardest mountains in the world, with little and sometimes no experience at all. Antonis Sykaris knew this and was why he was eager to get a head start on the season, as he is the most successful and experienced Greek climber to ever live. He was the only person from his country to have summited 5 of the 14 8,000'ers, but he did not want to stop there, as his goal was to summit all 14. At 59 years old and 32 years of mountaineering experience, well, he knew a thing or two about mountains. He had attempted to climb K2 in the winter of the 2021 season, but was unsuccessful as his good friend and climbing partner Antonis Sykaris fell to his death in front of Antonis, and it changed him, as you can imagine it would change almost anyone who witnessed the tragedy. He would abandon his attempt to summit, and during the descent develop frostbite, but he was the lucky one and would survive the trip. Antonis, while shaken, couldn't stop climbing as he had dedicated his life to the sport and knew Dhaulagiri was just the mountain for his first summit back. Dhaulagiri, standing at 8,167 meters, creates an intimidating view from Nepal. The mountain is known for its difficulty up the traditional route, as you are climbing on a steep slope with a sharp drop on either side. It has a death rate of just under 16% of all climbers, and most of these are attributed to falls and avalanches. As similar to all 8,000'ers, the weather is unpredictable to say the least. All this makes it one of the more technical and dangerous mountains on the traditional route, and is not as heavily trafficked as mountains such as Everest, which is a good thing, as a long line of climbers on a steep slope with falls of hundreds of feet to either side. Yeah, no thanks. The south face of Dhaulagiri is one of the last few pinnacles of the climbing world, as it has never been summited from. It is considered one of the most impressive faces in the mountaineering world, and there have been many attempts to scale it. Some have even come close, such as Tamza Humar's attempt in 1999, where he was just a few hundred meters under the summit but had to descend. It is 4,000 meters of a broad concavity and steep wall that has huge seracs leaning over you the entire climb. There are other routes that climb through areas on the south face, but an entire attempt of just that side of the mountain remains uncompleted to this day. All of these were reasons that attracted Antonis to Dhaulagiri, although he would be climbing up the traditional northern route. Antonis, along with Dawa Sherpa, would be making the summit attempt in April, and would arrive in Nepal early in the year and began the week-long trip to base camp. They would begin training and acclimating their bodies to the altitude. This is usually done by climbing the mountain, spending a few days at higher altitudes, and then descending back to base camp to recharge. During an acclimatization trip on Thursday, April 7th, another group that was on the mountain would meet with Antonis and Dawa at Camp 2 and offer for them to join them on their push to the summit. But Antonis would decline as he felt his body was not fully acclimated to the environment yet. Antonis and Dawa would descend back to base camp the following day. Antonis would consult his friend and meteorologist Kostas Gabriel, who was monitoring the weather on the mountain for the pair. He would inform Antonis that clear skies were expected for the next few days, and actually, the 11th or Monday would be the best day to summit. After receiving the news, Antonis began preparing for a summit attempt, after he had just admitted he was not fully ready a day prior. Typically, a climber would rest a few days at base camp after a rotation, but because of the weather forecast, Antonis and Dawa would only have one day of rest before they made their attempt. Dawa Sherpa and Antonis set out from base camp on April 9th, and after 12 hours of climbing, they would reach Camp 2 at 6,350 meters. They had their challenges, as there was heavy snow, and it was a technical climb, but this wasn't anything the pair was not expecting. Oh yeah, remember that group that was on the mountain? They did reach the summit on the same day that Antonis and Dawa reached Camp 2. On April 10th, they would again climb for 11 hours and reach Camp 3 at 7,329 meters, the last camp before the final summit push. Similar to other mountains, on summit day, climbers typically leave in the early hours in the morning or late at night so that they can reach the summit before it is too late in the day, as descending in the dark is a death sentence. On Dhaulagiri, it is an 8-hour climb to the summit from Camp 3 and a 10-hour descent, which is why Antonis and Dawa were planning on leaving late at night on the 10th. The only other group on the mountain had just made it to base camp after summiting, leaving Antonis and Dawa as the only two humans on the 8000'er. The weather was great on the 11th, as expected, but Antonis was starting to feel the effects of climbing, as he wasn't fully rested in his own admission of not being fully prepared. His breath was labored as he slowly followed Dawa Sherpa through the thick snow. They had made good progress through the night, and as the orange glow of the sun reflected off the snow, they were getting closer and closer to the summit. After hours of climbing, Antonis had only gotten worse as they had entered the death zone, or above 8,000 meters, as the oxygen in the air is only a third of normal sea level, making it more difficult to complete even simple tasks, much less climb mountains. Even so, they trekked on, and at 12:50 Nepal time, Dawa Sherpa and Antonis took the final steps to reach the summit of Dhaulagiri, only 1 year after his attempt of the Savage Mountain and losing a dear friend. Antonis' words, as he stood on top of the mountain, are the only suitable description of his emotions. He would dedicate the summit to all Greeks, and to his granddaughter, Irita. He would thank all of his friends and everyone who had supported him to help him reach the top. While overjoyed, Antonis was feeling the effects of the trip as his body was exhausted, enough where Dawa Sherpa was beginning to have doubt creep in, as it was obvious how much trouble his friend was having in the simple tasks that normally would be a breeze for him. Dawa would be leading the descent with Antonis right on his heels. Every few feet, he would turn around and ensure that Antonis was still behind him and making progress, but they were moving slower than Dawa would have liked. Antonis' breath were more labored at this point, and he was struggling to even walk, but his experience and instinct had already kicked in, and even though his mind was foggy, his legs knew what to do. The hours ticked by as they slowly made their way back to Camp 3. Eventually they made it out of the death zone, but Antonis never even noticed as they passed the mark, as his mind was strictly focused on breathing. 15 grueling hours went by, well past the normal 10-hour descent to Camp 3. The sun had set a long time ago. In fact, it was already early morning, yet Dawa and Antonis continued their slow pace. Antonis was no longer there mentally and physically, and it was around 4 a.m. during their descent when Dawa turned his head to check on his partner, and he saw his friend collapse into the slope of the mountain. Dawa Sherpa immediately made his way over to Antonis, but could hardly get any movement from his partner. It is not clear what Dawa's next actions were, but he was able to carry Antonis down to Camp 3. His condition would only worsen during the descent, and by the time they were in the thin tent situated on the side of the mountain, Antonis was barely holding on. It would only take a few hours, but at age 59, Antonis would pass away as Greece's most successful climber. A lack of oxygen, mental and physical exhaustion, or altitude sickness would eventually be ruled the cause of his death. Dawa would be stranded at Camp 3, but would radio down to base camp where a rescue team would be put together to help him off the mountain and retrieve Antonis' body. It would take another couple of days before the rescue team would reach Dawa at Camp 3, where they would eventually wrap Antonis and begin the descent. The rescue team would be with Dawa and Antonis the entire way down the mountain and off Dhaulagiri. It would be an understatement to say it was a tough loss on the mountaineering community, and of course, Greek climbers everywhere. While this story does not have an intense fall, bad weather conditions, or a freak accident, I thought it was an important one to tell, as it represents that trusting your body is always the right call, and even the air on an 8000'er can kill you.